Well, it's Blueberry Festival in Grand Haven coming up here pretty soon, folks. Welcome to 5 Star Real Estate, another live stream episode. I'm Eric Graham, your host. Going to be talking about a few things today, but before I do so, I was in Grand Haven on Saturday enjoying this wonderful market. It's known as the Crossroads Blueberry Market. If you ever get a chance, stop in there. Wonderful blueberry donuts, fresh picked blueberries, which I guess the season starts July 15 here for fresh picked blueberries, if anyone ever cares about blueberries. Blueberry coffee, you name it. Also another great restaurant to check out in Grand Haven is No Toes by Bill Maher out there on Lake Michigan. Put your feet in the sand and have a great cocktail. Now, with that being said, after I just explored Grand Haven on Saturday, it's time to get down to business here. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, Don told me to keep my pants on and don't moon anyone. So that's step one. I'm not going to do that. Step two, we're seeing a major issue with clients wanting to terminate their purchase agreement unlawfully. So you're going to want to try to help them get out of that purchase agreement, and you really need to resist doing so. Anytime an agent starts providing legal advice to a client on how to best terminate a purchase agreement and reduce their liability risk, you're practicing law. And even in the legal Q&A, the legal hotline for Michigan Realtor Association that came out a few months back had this topic in there. They're saying, please resist the urge to offer legal advice. Now, what we might be able to do, and I'll push the envelope a little bit here, is that you can sit down with your client. Let's say you have the purchase agreement. The client says, Eric, I have buyer's remorse. Now I want to terminate. Well, you can let them know that, one, we can see whether we can terminate. Let them know that they will definitely lose their EMD and some other things that could come up. It could be tens of thousands of dollars. But you have to understand, you always need to let them understand that they can speak to an attorney. And I'm encouraging all of our agents to get a Word document in place that just says buyer acknowledgement to seek legal guidance or advice. Put the date in there and simply explain to them that maybe you just write a statement that buyer had the opportunity to seek legal guidance on the termination of the following purchase agreement. Have them sign it and put it in dot loop so that it will at least allow you some protection so that that person doesn't come back and say, hey, Eric, you never told me to go see an attorney. Well, you'll be able to pull that document out and explain otherwise. So again, we always need to be careful about what we are doing when it comes time to clients wanting to terminate unlawfully. Again, maybe you can negotiate that they just lose their EMD and you can get a mutual release, but don't count on it. You just don't know. Another big thing that we're seeing in some of our purchase agreements is as-is language. So I'm going to be sending out a little bit later today or tomorrow an as-is language waiver for agents to get the clients to sign anytime they see language within the purchase agreement that states as is. And most jurisdictions have allowed the as is clause to be enforced to protect the seller against claims related to the condition of the property where there was no allegation of concealment or non-disclosure by the seller. So what is as is? We always see as is, but as is means the purchaser is acquiring real property in its present state or condition and implies the real property to be taken with whatever faults it may possess, and that the grantor is released of any obligation to reimburse purchaser or the buyer for losses or damages resulting from the condition of the property conveyed. Furthermore, the buyer chooses to rely entirely on their own determination of the condition and value of the purchase. Keep in mind that several cases have decided in the courts that the as-is clause, although ineffective to protect against claims for fraud or misrepresentation, it may be allowed to protect against non-disclosure. So an as-is clause will not protect a seller if they end up finding that there is fraud or misrepresentation. That's why disclosure laws are so important, and we're always recommending agents to tell their sellers, disclose, disclose, disclose. So there is a form coming up. It's going to be an as-is language waiver that will be typically for the buyer. So if a buyer is seeing that type of language or wants to accept a language like that, that it might be a good idea for the agents to get them to sign off on that type of waiver. All right, ready for the next big one. It's been anticipated. Everyone's been waiting for it. We've worked out what's known as an inspections being waived addendum. Yes, I know we have others already, but this one I think you're going to like. This will be for both buyers and sellers, and it's going to look something like this. This is an addendum that says inspections being waived, and there are actually 3 sections in here. So if your buyer chooses to waive inspections, they can fill out sections 1 and 3, and it basically says that the buyer agrees to waive inspections, and there's actually check boxes here where the buyer can actually check off which inspection they're going to waive, such as home inspection, radon, pest, well, water, and septic, septic system pumping, surveys. So there's now spots here that the buyer can actually check off to waive certain inspections. And then there's also a section here, section 3, that says repairs for inspections required by appraisal and or the lender. So many times, let's say with FHA or VA, you have an appraisal company that comes out, and now all of a sudden they're saying, hey, look, we need handrails put on here, or we have peeling paint. There's now going to be a section in here that says that either 1, the buyer agrees to pay all necessary repairs, or the seller agrees to pay all necessary repairs, or maybe the buyer will agree to pay up to a certain dollar value, or maybe the seller agrees to pay up to a maximum. So there's going to be multiple options now for both the buyer and sellers to be able to agree in advance what's going to happen during all of these types of inspections. There's also a section in here where if you have a buyer who wants to still perform inspections, but it's going to be for informational purposes only, it even states in here that this does not allow the buyer to terminate the purchase agreement based on the outcomes of the inspections. So we're giving very, very clear and strong language to your buyer and to a potential seller to know what is going to be expected of the outcome of these inspections. So you can look forward to this either later today or tomorrow in a mass email to all agents throughout 5-star. And again, I've labeled this addendum for inspections being waived. You can just see there's 3 sections here, and then there's a spot for buyers and sellers to sign off on that. Also, there's going to be a second sample language for writing inspection waivers. Don Phelan came up with this just a month ago. This is for individuals if they just want to write a common clause type of scenario and they don't want the full waiver of addendum. This is just where an agent can take and copy and paste this information into their other provisions in the purchase agreement. With this language, keep in mind that you will need to update what section's being referred to. Again, West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement has different sections compared to GCAR or WMLAR or any other location or any other purchase agreement within an association. So the language is there, although the sections may, or the reference to the actual section within the purchase agreement might need to be changed. But the information is there, and I think that should help agents understand how best to move forward with inspection waivers. Okay, here's a scenario. You represent a buyer, and the listing agent is representing a non-U.S. citizen, or also known as a foreign investor. Is there anything that you need to be aware of when you represent that buyer? And the answer is yes. There's an Internal Revenue Code, section 1445. That's not important. All I really want you to know is when you represent a buyer and you have a foreign investor who's not a U.S. citizen, there are tax ramifications to the buyer. Now, what does that mean? It means that we have to force the seller to put 15% of the proceeds of the sale into escrow, because the IRS is going to come knocking, and the IRS is going to want their money. So again, it could be anywhere from 10% if it's a $300,000 purchase up to $1 million. If it's over $1 million, it's 15%. But in general, we'd probably just say 15% of the proceeds need to go into escrow, because that's going to be a tax payment to the IRS. And guess what? If the buyer or the buyer's agent doesn't put that money into escrow as part of the purchase agreement, the buyer is going to be responsible for the taxes of the seller. It's one of these funny things. Yeah, the IRS is not going to go after a non-U.S. citizen. So guess what? The U.S. citizen who's buying that new home gets moved in. Everything is great. They get a letter from the IRS saying that they now owe 15% of the sale that just occurred. It's not going to be a good situation. So, not that you have to remember this, I just want you to be aware of that. Just keep in mind in the back of your head that anytime the listing agent or a seller is a non-U.S. citizen, there's going to be a caveat there associated, maybe even with a common clause that we can help you with to understand how to put those money into escrow. There's also another option for foreign investors. They can give you a exemption waiver as a foreign investor in the U.S. living here. That states that they have to give you their tax identification number, their full name, their address, and they also need to, it's a certification, they also need to sign this certification waiver under penalty of perjury. If they give you that certification, then you don't need to worry about taking extra money out and putting it in escrow. So that certification is almost like it's an exemption waiver for foreign investors. And if you get that form, you will need to keep that for 5 years as a buyer. So the buyer's agent should also consider making sure that you keep that documentation on behalf of your client for 5 years. You might need to, the buyer might need to provide it to the IRS for taxes at some time. They may not, but just something that is out there to be aware of. I think there's a comment coming in here. Let me take a look here.
None yet.
Oh, there it is. I think that just came up here. The comment there.
Oh,
Yeah.
which one?
I know. It says, I think Eric is the greatest deal doctor. Anyway, next topic. Broker admin fees. We're having some issues still with broker admin fees and when to charge the client. So let me just emphasize what is a broker admin fee. And with 5-star, we do charge a $295 broker admin fee to the client. And we must always have a paper trail for any compensation that 5-star receives. So a $295 is charged to both parties when there is an unrepresented buyer. So let's say you're represented buyer and you're going after a FSBO. The seller's not represented. Do we still charge the FSBO or the unrepresented party a $295? And the answer is yes, we do. The compensation agreement that's in .loop can actually spell out what the FSBO will be paying as a commission, as well as what the admin fee will be. And the broker admin fee does not grant or imply representation in any way. It is 5-star's policy to collect that $295 from all parties if we are the only broker involved in the transaction. Now, how do you tell this to people who are wanting to pay that? You simply say that the broker admin fee is used to cover a multitude of expenses. It pays for 5-star for E&O premiums. It pays for liability claims. It pays for staff who must manage the ledger for the transaction. including creating one for the buyer. So even though the buyer isn't represented, 5-Star is still creating a ledger that we are still required to track and keep these documentations for at least 3 years. So just keep that in mind when it comes to why do we need a broker admin fee. All right, we're about halfway through this right now. There's another topic that I want to go over briefly. It's known as Escalation Clause addendum. I created another Escalation Clause addendum that I'll be sending out with 5-Star. And this addendum, it says here that this addendum is attached to be part of the purchase agreement dated covering a property at blank. It says, in the event that seller receives one or more bona fide, good faith competing offers to purchase the above property, referenced above at a price higher than the price contained in the buyer's offer, then buyer will escalate the price and pay blank dollars above the highest bona fide offer, less any and all seller paid closing costs or concessions, up to a maximum purchase price of blank. What's interesting is with this common clause language that we have here, it says if this escalation provision is invoked, seller agrees to provide a copy of the highest offer and proof of funds or pre-qualification letter to buyer to justify the escalated purchase price. Now, I've put two options in here, and it says check items to be included in the purchase agreement. Option 1 is that the buyer and seller agree that the new appraisal price will become the new sales price. How many times do we have escalation clauses that escalate up and up and up, and then all of a sudden the appraisal comes in, and then someone tries to renegotiate the appraisal price? Well, there is an option here, or they try to renegotiate the sales price on the appraisal price. Agents need to be careful because that escalation clause, once triggered, will be the new sales price. It's going to be substantially higher, most likely, than the appraisal price. So if there's a box checked, or if you have protection that says that, hey, my client's only going to pay the appraisal price, it kind of disqualifies the escalation because you're saying, hey, I'm going to pay $100,000 over your list price. The home comes in $100,000 less. Well, your client better have the $100,000 to cover the difference between the low appraisal and the sales price, unless the purchase agreement allows for both parties to renegotiate based on the appraisal. Now, this escalation clause takes out some of that negotiation in advance, where one option would be that the buyer and seller will agree that the new appraisal price will become the new sales price on the purchase agreement. That could be great for buyers if it's a low appraisal. It could be terrible for sellers if it's a low appraisal, because they've already agreed to a much higher price. Now, the other option is here, if the home does not appraise at or above a certain price, then the seller has the right to renegotiate the sales price or terminate the purchase agreement. So there are additional options here that will become more clear once you see this, or if you start wanting to use this, that you can give us a call and we can walk you through this. This escalation clause addendum also has an option for the seller to respond. One could be that the offer is accepted pursuant to the offer and above escalation clause that's been triggered. The purchase price is blank. I don't know how many times where we get an escalation clause that gets triggered because you have multiple offers competing, gets triggered up to maybe $30,000 above the sales price, and then all of a sudden the listing agent or the seller agent says, hey, I want to accept this escalation clause. What do I need to do to tell the buyer? This has that language in there that you can check, or you can just, what we normally would recommend is to write an acknowledgement that just says escalation clause has been triggered, sales price to be blank, and that can go on a Word document and provided back if you end up accepting the offer as is. What you don't want to do is a counter offer, because once you counter the escalation, once that escalation gets to a certain point, and you say, well, I want to clarify what the new price is going to be, and you do a counter, it opens up the negotiation. That means that the buyer does not have to sign the counter. If your seller wants to accept that escalation clause at that really high price, you would just click you would accept the contract, and then in that contract you would just say, for clarification purposes, sales price to be blank because of escalation clause, and you would leave it at that. Again, this escalation clause addendum actually has language already built in there for what the seller can do to trigger, or if they want to terminate the agreement, there's an option for them to do so as well. But again, these addendums will be out either later today or tomorrow. We're just finalizing last minute language within all of these. Hopefully it will provide some type of clarification on these situations that keep coming up. That's about it for now. I know there was a lot of information there, and this 22 minutes that I had, if anyone had questions, by all means, let me know or give me a call on the Deal Doctor line, 616-490-0902. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week. Hang in there and continue to do great things with 5-Star Real Estate. Till next time, thank you.